I'm going to start today by sharing with you probably my most pirate moment to date. Aged 8 at a pirate party where I went dressed as a mermaid. I remember this moment really clearly because I was adamant I didn't want to go dressed as a boy. Little did I know then that there were female pirates too, but I made my mum make me this really quite fabulous mermaid costume with her sewing machine, which you could do when in the days before Primark when you made stuff at home. And I went and I enjoyed every single moment of that moment of rebellion. In hindsight, I can see that despite my costume, I'm clearly the most pirate person at the party, because Be More Pirate is first and foremost about giving yourself permission to break a few rules, to reclaim some agency in a situation and to go your own way. However, despite my childhood anomaly here, I, up until very recently, wouldn't have described myself as much of a rule breaker or rebel at all. I was pretty good at following rules, following the well-established trodden path in front of me. I thought that was going to be the route to success. And it kind of was to a degree, except for the glaring fact that I got to the point in about 2018 when I had to admit that I was completely miserable with my life. And that was really the moment when this book came into my life, Be More Pirate, which is written by my co-pirate and colleague, Sam Conniff, who's a social entrepreneur. However, this book came into my life. I picked it up, read 2 pages and put it right back down. I didn't initially really like it, and partly because I was completely judging the book by its cover. I looked at it and thought, this looks like a really good marketing concept, but it's a bit of a clickbaity subtitle, How to Take on the World and Win. And fundamentally, I was coming from a place of a lot of disillusionment with leaders, people with influence, who had this big promise of change. And I'd worked for 10 years in the charity sector, and frankly, it felt like things were getting worse rather than better. And so all these big change initiatives and the endless reports we were writing, where the hell was it getting us? I didn't think it was getting us anywhere. And I knew that we needed a more radical spirit. And so this book, I was drawn to this book, but I didn't yet believe the promise of it. And it was only when I saw a job advert for a right-hand pirate that I went back to the book, read it properly, because I realized this was the same pirate guy whose book I didn't like. And I realized that I'd never seen change presented in this way before. And although I still had questions, I applied for the job. I took all my healthy cynicism right to Sam's doorstep and said, is your book more style over substance? And what do you mean by creating a global community out of this book? Like, I've seen endless networks being created, and why is this going to be meaningful? And he just said, you tell me. I don't know, I've got an email folder of about 500 largely unread emails from people who've said that this book is changing their life, that they are doing stuff off the back of it, that they're taking my words very seriously, and they are rebelling, they're creating a mutiny at work, they're quitting their jobs, they're starting over, and I don't know what to do with it all. And he was so honest and transparent as a leader that immediately made me trust him. And we went on this incredible adventure. And that's, been a wild, wild ride. I began from that point of opening that huge email folder and starting to delve into the messages that people had been sending Sam and understanding their stories and what it meant. And my question was always, how do you be more pirate? I wanted to get to the practical level of it. What in the book was resonating so much, and how was it making them really make changes in their life? And I didn't ever imagine it would end up in another book, honestly, but there was so much substance behind it, it would have been a shame not to capture that. And because my background is communications, I knew that more people would take up arms if they could see other people like themselves doing it. So it became a whole new book. And I think that the first thing I want to say about what I took from our community, our crew, as we call them, was the line that stood out most in Be More Pirate. The line that was most highlighted as the starting point of the pirate journey was this one: no one is coming to save you. Like, the moment when you realize that all the external institutions and systems and leaders that you've long relied upon for safety and stability, frankly, are either incompetent or fragile. And actually, if you want to change your future, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I've heard that from endless other activists and campaigners since. They said that they've all had that moment of that scary, terrifying, but also liberating moment of realizing they've got to reclaim their own agency. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was that obviously we've all experienced this for the last 2 years, this kind of fracturing of the system, and realizing the stability is almost an illusion. We don't really have a story to support us in stepping into that power. And that's what Pirates was giving people, this overarching narrative that had some heroism in it, where ordinary people could do extraordinary things. And that putting on that avatar of pirates, at a kind of like disguise, gave people permission and power that they didn't otherwise have. However, I'm always contending forever with this version of piracy, which is in fact the kind of Disney version, the idea that pirates are these ridiculous, cartoonish villains who are only out for themselves, who are lying and thieving. And in fact, most of what we know about pirates is actually fiction rather than fact, partly due to Walt Disney, but partly because the establishment always makes terrifying what it is in itself afraid of. So part of the mythology of pirates is because they were so threatening to the establishment, they villainized them on purpose. The reality of piracy was probably a little bit more like this. This is a scene from the 1700s, roughly, because Be More Pirate hones in on a period of history called the Golden Age of Piracy, which is roughly 1700 to 1730, a moment in time when a group of ordinary citizens stood up against the establishment, challenged the status quo, realized that they were doing the bidding of this self-serving elite who were out plundering and exploiting the world. And they'd had enough. 40% of sailors died on any voyage. The conditions they were experiencing were dire. It's about the worst workplace conditions you could possibly imagine. And they'd had enough. A lot of them were really skilled sailors. So they decided to jump ship, form a crew of their own, and see if they could operate more successfully outside of the law, which came with its own challenges, of course, like they were being hunted down. And you suddenly had this situation where you're on board a new crew with no rules necessarily, completely blank slate. And so they had to figure out this completely new way of living and working together in opposition to what they'd experienced in the Navy, which is where the story is really interesting and what is uncovered in Be More Pirates. The new rules that pirates created, it's far less about the rules that pirates broke and is really about the ones that they made. First of all, real democracy. On a pirate ship, you had a one-man, one-vote system. The first strategic move to prevent conflict on board was to ensure that the rules were created by everybody through proper consensus. It's far less likely that you're going to mutiny against a rule that you yourself have created. So pirate crews are more democratic than what you saw in ancient Greece, and certainly more democratic than our system right now. They put proper checks and balances on power, again, something we still don't do today properly. Rather than having one captain and risking tyranny, they had a dual leadership system with a quartermaster who represented the crew, and both of those leadership positions could be voted out at any point in time. They gave everyone equal pay, roughly. Only roles that had more risk and responsibility had more compensation. Again, to prevent conflict, very strategic move. Nothing causes conflict like money, so they're very flat pay structures. They also gave compensation if you got an injury. So rather than being left for dead in a battle on a Navy ship, you would actually get either a peg leg or compensation for your woes. And it was strategic to incentivize the crew to take part in the battles. And of course, I'm sure there was the added benefit of people feeling that their lives weren't expendable in the same way. And pirates even had same-sex marriage. That became one of the rules in the pirate code, that if you were in a same-sex relationship, you'd be treated the same. And there was even a ritual ceremony for it and an inheritance clause in that meant that if your partner died, you get their share of whatever treasure they had. So it was really sophisticated and incredibly progressive. So that's a few of the new rules that pirates decided to create on board a ship. I hope that starts to convince you that they're more like innovators than troublemakers. But I think the really important point is that they didn't try and set out with this lofty ambition to change the whole world. They weren't actually moralizers. They were actually just about changing their world. It was like, what's my starting point? How can I make things better for myself? And what they did was create a kind of ripple effect. It was so appealing and so threatening to the establishment. More and more people wanted to become pirates. But what the rules that they created were in direct opposition to what they experienced. And I think this is a really good starting point and something I often use with teams. Start with this question. What are the rules? What is the status quo that you're experiencing? And what's interesting about this question when I do it with people is it's not so much about the explicit rules, the laws, the policies and the regulations that inhibit us and stop us from having permission to make changes. It's the implicit stuff, like the cultural norms that we've created, the unspoken assumptions. And quite often it's not until someone actually challenges those things that you realize that those rules even exist in the first place. So set out what are the rules to begin with. However, rule breaking is only one part of this. The Pirate Rebellion is creative. It's more about the rule making. So once you've identified the rules that you want to break, like found the seeds of frustration, it's more about transforming what you're fighting against into what you're fighting for. And that's why this whole movement has so much kind of optimism and like positive energy behind it, because it's more about the new, creating the new. However, in order to do that, to really get there, you have to be willing to start to inhabit the unknown. You don't get to something new, a new alternative, until you're willing to really get into the unknown and unfamiliar territory, what we call going off the edges of the map. Being willing to step into the darkness and kind of roam around for a bit. And off the edges, you have, of course, dragons, fear, but also opportunity, huge amounts of opportunity. And I break this down a little bit more clearly for people because it's a kind of abstract concept, and unless you offer some guidance. So I usually ask 3 questions on this. First of all, ask yourself, what is off the edges of your map? Like, what are the taboo subjects that you're not talking about, whatever sphere you're in, your team, your organization, your friendship group? What's being swept underneath the rug? And start there. Who is off the edges of your map? Who have you never had a conversation with? Who is off your radar? Who could give you an entirely new perspective on a problem? And whose life experience do you just not fundamentally understand? It will 100% give you unexpected insights. And then where are you not going? What spaces and places can you go to that will inspire or provoke new thoughts? Because environment has such a big impact on our mindset. And if you're not regularly disrupting yourself and getting out there, then you can't hope to be on the forefront of pioneering anything new. I want to give you one brief example of this from our book, because I think it makes it a little bit more tangible. And to show how it can be properly applied, I'm always for all the examples. So this is a sex shop, and it is a particular sex shop in East London called quite a sort of feminist, progressive one. 3 or 4 years ago, Macmillan, the cancer charity, did a report on health inequalities across London. And they created, as a result of that, a really, really diverse community of people who'd experienced cancer in different ways to try and understand the difference in experience. And one day, a young woman in the community came forward and said, you know what, the one thing that I can't get information on about my experience with cancer is sex after cancer, and not just sex in terms of my fertility, but sex in terms of pleasure. You know, once you've had cancer, your body's kind of rearranged entirely. And I can't find any guidance. Not only can I not find guidance, but no one even knows where to signpost me. And she was young. She was only 28. She'd recovered from Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she was very much on the fringes of this community because she was young. So she was someone who was kind of at the edges of the community. And so she suggested they do a sex and cancer workshop, which they did. After surveying the rest of the community, it turns out that lots of people would like information on this. And so they took it into, partnered with the sex shop, took it into there and allowed their experts to guide the women in the workshop. And being in that different environment, a non-clinical setting, opened up the conversation so much. It gave them, you know, allowed them to talk more openly about how it affected their relationships and their relationships with their bodies. And it was a pretty transformative experience. So this kind of represents all 3 aspects: somebody who was at the edges, going into a space that was at the edges, and tackling, of course, an uncomfortable topic, which is sex. However, being off the edges of the map as the final part of piracy, this isn't enough. You know, having pushed people to explore the limits of their courage and imagination in lots of different workshops and settings, it's not that alone won't get you anywhere, because in our really, really busy lives today, what we really need to do is create manageable actions that are going to start to move us into that alternative future that we're imagining. And when we started doing this work, we always asked the question, like, what's going to be your new rule? And people would go so big with their new rules that I just knew that they were never going to be manageable. There was no way these things were going to be actioned in the next few days or weeks. And then that's when hope dies, because the momentum dies and you go, nothing ever changes. And I think I heard it somewhere that the biggest obstacle to change is the belief, the collective belief that nothing ever changes. And so you have to demonstrate that change can happen in the most easy way possible, which is why I always tell people to come up with small, bold actions, something that will move the dial on your bigger rule rewrite or change that is easily logistically achievable in the next week, that is bold, as in it's something that's got to be out of your norm and put you on the edge of your comfort zone, but not so bold that you're risking anything really big, because then you risk burnout and, you know, pretty dire consequences. We don't want that. And ideally something that's also repeatable, because then you compound the impact of it. One final example I'll give for this, because I think to make it tangible for you, is a team that I worked with in a big local authority who really just wanted to change the culture. And they knew they needed to take some risks. They knew they needed to do something bolder, but they had a pretty risk-averse culture. So they needed to figure out something that was gonna just start that momentum for them and almost like have a quick and easy win. So they got together in a cafe down the road, started to test out some ideas, decided that they were going to create some new rules around email culture. But the critical thing was that they decided to put their new rules as part of their email signature. So it wasn't just about sending around an email once and saying, these are our new rules. It was compounding the impact every single time they sent an email. And these were the new rules. Breaking the tyranny of email culture by thinking before I email, can I have a conversation instead? Taking protected time away from email to focus on the stuff that makes the biggest difference. Checking my tone. Am I structuring in a way I'd be pleased to receive? And if it's bad news, I won't deliver by email. So there's a kind of rehumanizing of the culture. And I know this might seem really not pirate and really not a big deal to many of you out there, but this is where it starts. Like, I've done this over and over and seen that you've got to create that initial momentum, start with the baby steps and build up to the bigger stuff. Because actually, with small, bold actions, it's not so much about getting the outcome you want straight away. It's about who you become in the process of trying and testing your tolerance for risk. That's the only way we're going to move more people into their own power and start to see much bigger societal changes happening. So if I'd leave you with anything, it is, what is a small, bold step you could take? I'll just take myself out of that. In the next week, that would put you outside of your comfort zone, and you can get done and you can demonstrate it. And if you can do it with someone else, all the better, because rules are created and broken socially. So give yourself the permission and take a small, bold step. Thank you.